She worked at the same hospital for 17 years. She saved hundreds of lives. She knew every protocol, every hallway, every nurse by name. And on a Tuesday afternoon, the medical director called her into a closed room and told her that her contract would not be renewed. No explanation, no warning, nothing. What they didn't know, what they never imagined, is that for months before that day, she had documented everything. Every falsified billing code, every invented procedure, every elderly patient whose name was used to defraud the federal government out of millions of dollars. She didn't leave in silence. She left with proof. And when the United States Department of Justice knocked on that hospital's door, they understood the mistake they had made. This is the story of Dr. Valeria Cross, and you are going to want to watch until the very end.
I remember the smell of Miami Central Medical Center on the first morning I walked through those doors. It was August of 2007. I was 27 years old, fresh out of residency, carrying a worn backpack over my shoulder and a white coat still bearing the laundry tag. The air conditioning from the corridor hit my face and I thought, this is it. This is the place. 17 years later, I walked out of there carrying a cardboard box with my belongings and a flash drive in my pocket worth more than the entire hospital. But that part comes later. First, you need to understand what I built in that place and what they destroyed. The emergency department at Miami Central was the heart of the hospital. We were the only level 2 trauma center within a 12-mile radius of Little Havana. We never stopped. Immigrants without health insurance, elderly Medicare patients who had no one left to speak for them, entire families arriving at 3 in the morning because they had nowhere else to go. I love that work in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who has never worked in an emergency room. Every shift was controlled chaos. Every decision mattered. Every patient was an entire universe of urgency and fear and hope. My name was known on every floor. The nurses called me Dr. V. The residents came to me when they didn't know what to do. I had trained 4 generations of physicians in that hospital, and I believed, truly, naively believed, that that place was as much mine as it was anyone else's. Dr. Raymond Alcott arrived at the hospital in 2019 as Chief Medical Officer. He was 51 years old. Perfectly combed silver hair, suits that didn't belong in any hospital I had ever seen, and a Wharton MBA framed on his office wall right next to his medical degree, which I later discovered he had barely used. Raymond Alcott had spent most of his career in hospital administration, not in clinical medicine. In the first meeting we had, he greeted me with a firm handshake, looked me in the eyes and said, Dr. Cross, I've heard a great deal about you. The emergency department is in good hands. I smiled. I thanked him. I thought working with him would be straightforward. I was very wrong. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible. In March of 2022, we began receiving new billing forms. Nothing unusual. Forms change, but some new fields seemed strange to me. There were codes for procedures I didn't recognize, specialist consultations that had not been requested, tests that appeared as having been performed on patients I had treated, and that I knew with certainty had not had those tests done. I asked the billing coordinator, a woman named Patrice, about the new codes. She looked away, said it was new administrative policy, said I should speak with Dr. Alcott if I had questions. I spoke with Dr. Alcott. He explained to me, very calmly and very patiently, that the hospital was optimizing the federal reimbursement process and that the new protocols had been approved by the legal department. He told me not to worry about the administrative side. My function was to care for patients. I went back to the emergency room, but I didn't stop looking. It was on a Thursday in October of 2022 that everything changed. I was finalizing the chart of a patient, Mrs. Dolores Menendez, 81 years old, arrived with chest pain, diagnosed with stable angina, discharged in 6 hours with a prescription and instructions. A simple case, well documented. 2 weeks later, by chance, I saw her chart pass through the system for internal audit review. I stopped. I opened the file, and I stared at that screen for almost 3 minutes without being able to breathe properly. The chart of Mrs. Dolores Menendez, my patient, the woman I had treated, examined, spoken with, sent home, showed a diagnostic cardiac catheterization, a high-cost procedure, billed to Medicare, a procedure she had never had, a procedure I had never ordered. My name was on the chart as the responsible physician. I closed the screen. I looked both ways down the corridor. No one had seen me, and I thought, in that moment, the coldest and clearest thought I had ever had in my professional life. They are using my patients, and they are using my name to do it. I could have gone directly to Dr. Alcott. I could have taken it to HR, to the hospital board, to the legal department he himself had mentioned. But something, an instinct that 17 years in emergency medicine gives you, of reading a situation before acting, told me not to do that. Not yet. First, I needed to understand the size of what I was seeing. So I did what any good physician would do when faced with a new and concerning symptom. I began to document. During the following 3 weeks, I worked 2 shifts simultaneously. The first was my normal work. Patients, diagnoses, decisions, protocols. The emergency room doesn't stop because your mind is somewhere else. It doesn't care about what you've discovered. It only demands that you be present. The second shift was invisible. It was mine. Every time I accessed a chart, for any legitimate clinical reason, I took an extra second to check the billing history of that patient. Not all of them. Not systematically yet, because I knew that access, outside the normal pattern, could trigger alerts in the system. I was careful, methodical. I chose cases that had passed through my hands in the last 6 months. In 3 weeks, I found 11 cases, 11 patients with billed procedures that had never been performed, 11 charts with my name as the responsible physician for procedures I had never ordered. I bought a notebook, physical, paper. I wrote nothing on the hospital computer. I sent no emails to anyone. I spoke with no colleague, no nurse, no resident. Each entry in the notebook had date of visit, coded patient name, billed procedure code, actual procedure code, estimated value difference. I kept that notebook at the bottom of my bag, under my spare coat. Every night before sleeping, I opened that notebook and stared at the numbers, trying to understand the size of what I was documenting. The average value of a diagnostic cardiac catheterization billed to Medicare in 2022 was approximately $4,200. 11 cases, $4,000 each, just among the patients I had personally treated. I was a physician in an emergency department that saw 300 patients a month, and there were at least 6 other senior physicians in my department. The math was terrifying. It was on a Friday in November that I made what I thought, in that moment, was a mistake, and what I would later understand to be the best decision of my life. I was in the hospital cafeteria, alone, at a corner table, rereading my notes with the notebook hidden under a newspaper, completely absorbed. I didn't hear the chair scrape against the floor. I didn't notice that someone had sat down across the table. When I looked up, I saw a woman in her 50s, short brown hair, a navy blue blouse, a completely neutral expression. She wasn't wearing a coat. She didn't have a hospital badge. She placed a coffee cup on the table, looked at me, and said in a low, completely casual voice, "Dr. Cross, I know what you're doing, and I needed you to know that you are not doing it alone." Her name was Agent Sandra Reeves. She was a senior investigator with the Office of Inspector General of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, the HHS OIG, the federal arm responsible for investigating fraud against Medicare and Medicaid. Miami Central Medical Center had been under investigation for 14 months. I stared at her for a long moment without saying anything. Then I said, 14 months and nobody did anything. She said, "Federal investigation is not emergency surgery, Dr. Cross. You cannot act before you have a complete diagnosis." That I understood. It was exactly the language I used. Sandra explained what they already knew, and what they still needed. The scheme had not begun with Dr. Alcott. It had begun 3 years earlier with the hospital's CFO, Sandra Voss, a 48-year-old woman who had identified that the hospital was leaving money on the table by not maximizing federal reimbursement billing. So she and Alcott went beyond the limit of what was actually eligible, far beyond. The preliminary federal investigation estimate was $18 million in fraudulent Medicare billing over the past 4 years. $18 million. And the physicians whose names appeared on the charts, myself included, knew nothing. "So I'm a victim in this story?" I asked. Sandra Reeves looked at me with an expression that wasn't exactly compassion, but was close to it. "You were," she said. "Until today." She explained what the government needed: clinical confirmation, a physician from inside who could attest that the billed procedures had never been performed, a physician who knew those patients, who had the real treatment records, who could say, in formal testimony, "This procedure never happened. I know because I was there." She needed me. And then Sandra Reeves placed on the table, next to the coffee cup, a simple white card with a phone number. "Don't decide now," she said. "But don't take too long, because when they realize someone is watching, and they will realize, the first thing they will do is try to silence you." She stood up, took her cup, and left without looking back. I sat at that table for another 20 minutes. I thought about the 11 names in my notebook. I thought about Mrs. Dolores Menendez, 81 years old, stable angina, discharged in 6 hours, with a catheterization on her chart that had never existed. I thought about what it meant to have your name used, to steal from the federal government, to steal from vulnerable patients, to turn the suffering of elderly people into a revenue line on a quarterly report. I thought about the 17 years I had given that hospital, and then I took the card, put it in my coat pocket, and went back to the emergency room. Because there were patients waiting, and because I had already made my decision, I called Sandra Reeves the following morning, not from my personal cell phone. I walked to a pharmacy 3 blocks from the hospital, bought a prepaid phone with cash, and called from the parking lot outside, with the car running and the air conditioning on full, because Miami in November was still too hot to think clearly. She answered on the second ring. She said only, "I was expecting your call." In the days that followed, Sandra guided me through every step. I could not alter anything in the charts. I could not make copies through the hospital system. I could not speak with any colleague, any nurse, any resident. What I could do was continue documenting in the physical notebook: date, coded patient, actual procedure versus billed procedure. Each entry was a line of testimony. And there was one more thing I could do. Sandra delivered, in an envelope, with no return address, left on my car windshield. In the hospital parking lot, a small digital recorder, the size of a lighter, 40 hours of battery, Voice activated. Meetings, hallways, informal conversations, she had said. Everything that is said to you about billing, about procedures, about your performance. Record it. Don't provoke, just record. I began carrying that recorder in my coat pocket every day, left side, close to my heart. It felt appropriate. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. The emergency room routine continued. Alcott crossed paths with me in the corridors and smiled with that hollow executive cordiality Voss I barely saw. She stayed on the 12th floor, in the territory of the administrative offices where physicians rarely went. I worked, I documented, I waited, and then, on a Monday in December, I received an internal email. Dr. Cross, please come to Executive Meeting Room B, 12th floor, at 2 p.m. this Thursday. Agenda, performance review and protocol alignment. I called Sandra immediately. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "They noticed something, but this meeting is not about your performance." "Then it's about silencing me," I said. "It's about assessing how much you know," she said, "and deciding what to do with you." She coached me on how to behave. Listen more than speak, show no sign that I knew anything beyond what they presented, and record every second of that meeting. I stepped into the 12th floor elevator on Thursday at 1:58, with the recorder in my left pocket and my heart beating as if I were in an emergency code. Executive Meeting Room B had a view of Biscayne Bay. Alcott was seated at the head of the table. Beside him, for the first time in person, I saw Sandra Voss. She was smaller than I had imagined. Blonde hair pulled back, thin glasses, a leather folder in front of her. She looked more like an accountant than the architect of an $18 million scheme. On the other side of the table sat the hospital's in-house attorney. 3 against 1. Alcott began with a soft voice, almost paternal. He said I was one of the most respected physicians in the hospital, that my contribution over 17 years was invaluable, that he personally admired me. I said thank you. Then he shifted his tone, subtle, almost imperceptible. But I had spent 17 years reading the body language of patients in crisis. I saw the shift. He said the compliance department had identified an unusual pattern of chart access in recent weeks. Access outside the normal clinical flow. Records consulted without justification of active treatment. He looked me in the eyes and said, "We wanted to understand if you were having difficulty with the new systems, or if there was a concern you would like to bring to leadership." It was a question with a knife underneath it. I took a deep breath and said, with the calmest voice I could find, that I had noticed some new fields on the billing forms and was trying to understand the new protocols. I said I had probably consulted some older charts as coding references. Alcott smiled, said he understood completely. Sandra Voss didn't smile. She watched me with an expression I could only describe as calibration, as if she were calculating how much I knew and how much I was hiding. Then Voss spoke for the first time. She said the hospital was going through a transition phase in clinical documentation processes, and that it was natural for there to be confusion. She said it would be prudent for senior physicians to focus on clinical care and leave billing and coding matters to the specialized team. Then she paused and said, "Physicians who attempt to weigh in on revenue cycle without proper training frequently create complications for themselves and for the hospital." That was not an observation. That was a warning. The meeting lasted 42 minutes. When I left the room and stepped into the elevator, my hands were cold despite the Miami heat. I looked at my reflection in the metallic elevator door. White coat, hair pulled back, controlled expression, and thought, they just threatened me on a federal recorder. That night, I met Sandra Reeves in a parking lot, 2 kilometers from the hospital. She listened to the recording in her car, earphones in, without saying a word. When it finished, she removed the earphones and stared through the windshield for a moment. Then she said, "That is obstruction." The in-house attorney present, during an implicit threat to a potential federal witness. "They just made their situation significantly worse," I asked. "And my situation?" Sandra looked at me. "You have between 2 and 3 weeks before they decide that conversation isn't enough and move to direct action. Fabricated termination for cause, credential suspension, something to take you off the board before you can act. 2 to 3 weeks. It was then that Sandra explained the weapon I didn't know I had. The False Claims Act, a federal law from 1863, originally created to combat contractor fraud during the Civil War, that allowed private citizens to file suit on behalf of the federal government against companies defrauding federal contracts, including Medicare and Medicaid. The mechanism was called qui tam, from the Latin qui tam pro domino, rege quam pro se ipso in hac parte sequitur, he who sues on behalf of the king, as well as for himself. In practice, I could file a sealed action against Miami Central Medical Center. The Department of Justice would take over the case, and if the action was successful, if the hospital was ordered to return the fraudulent amounts, I, as the whistleblower, would be entitled to receive between 15 and 30% of the recovered value. 15 to 30% of $18 million. Sandra put me in contact with the attorney. His name was Marcus Webb, a whistleblower litigation specialist. Office in Coral Gables. He had sued 3 hospital systems in the last 8 years. We met the following afternoon in a windowless conference room with bad coffee and documents covering every available surface. Marcus Webb looked at my notebook, at the dates, at the codes, at the estimated values, and said only, "This is solid, very solid." Then he looked at me over his glasses and said, "Dr. Cross, you are about to enter the most important battle of your career. I need to know, are you prepared to go all the way?" I thought about the 11 names in the notebook. I thought about Mrs. Dolores Menendez. I thought about the 17 years. I thought about Sandra Voss's warning. Physicians who attempt to weigh in on revenue cycle frequently create complications for themselves. And I said, I'm already at the end. I just need them to find out. The qui tam action was filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida on January 14th, 2023 at 9:17 in the morning, sealed, confidential, invisible. That same day at 2 p.m., I walked into the emergency department of Miami Central Medical Center, put on my coat, and treated 23 patients, as if nothing had happened, because the best revenge, I learned that day, is the one the enemy cannot see coming. For 43 days after the filing, I lived 2 lives simultaneously. The first was visible, shifts in the emergency room, team meetings, bad coffee in the physician's lounge, exchanges in the corridor with Alcott, who continued smiling at me with that storefront cordiality, and with Voss, who I rarely saw, but who, on the few times we crossed paths, watched me with that cold, calculating expression I had learned to recognize and ignore. The second life was silent. Brief meetings with Sandra Reeves in different locations each time. A coffee shop in Brickell, the parking lot of a supermarket in Coral Gables, once in the back seat of her car, in a park at 6 in the morning, while Miami woke up around us. The DOJ had accepted the case. The federal investigation was in its final phase. Marcus Webb called me every 3 days with updates in carefully neutral language, as if we were discussing a clinical case. The patient is responding well to treatment. The tests confirm the diagnosis. We are approaching the procedure. I had learned to sleep normally again. I had learned to separate the compartments, the physician and the whistleblower, with the same precision with which I separated clinical cases in the middle of a chaotic shift. And then, one morning in March, I received a message from Marcus. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., be at the hospital. It was 9:47 when I arrived at the emergency department that Thursday. I put on my coat. I checked the waiting patients. I took my first coffee of the day. At 10:03, I heard a different sound from the floor above. It wasn't an emergency sound. I knew that sound by heart. It was another kind of urgency. Voices in the administrative corridor, quick footsteps, a door slamming. A nurse walked into the triage room with wide eyes and said, "Dr. Cross, there are a bunch of people in suits on the 12th floor. Hospital security isn't letting anyone go up." I looked at my coffee. I placed the cup on the table carefully and said, "It's fine, keep working." At 10 a.m. sharp, a team of 8 HHS OIG agents and 2 federal prosecutors from the Southern District of Florida had entered the hospital lobby with search and seizure warrants. The billing department servers were sealed. The computers of Sandra Voss and Dr. Raymond Alcott were confiscated. The physical files of the in-house legal department were removed in numbered boxes. Voss was found in her office. Alcott was in a meeting with the board when agents walked through the door. The in-house attorney, who had been present at the meeting with me in December, immediately asked to speak with a personal attorney, separate from the hospital. A clear sign she knew exactly what was happening. Neither of them was arrested that day. Federal arrests in corporate fraud cases rarely happen on the first raid. The process is slower, more methodical, more devastating than any dramatic scene with handcuffs. What happened that day was in certain ways worse than an arrest. The hospital board found out. At 2 p.m., I received a call from the hospital board president, a man named Gerald Park, whom I had greeted at institutional events for years, but with whom I had never exchanged more than protocol phrases. He said the hospital was cooperating fully with the federal authorities, and that significant changes in executive leadership would be announced within 48 hours. Then he paused and said, "Dr. Cross, I would like to personally thank you. What you did required a courage that few people would have." I was silent for a moment. Then I said, "Mr. Park, I only did what any physician should do, protect the patients." He said, "Yes, but you were the only one who did." Raymond Alcott was placed on administrative leave that same afternoon. Sandra Voss submitted her resignation at 5 p.m., less than 7 hours after the federal agents arrived. Marcus told me later that the speed of the resignation suggested her attorney had negotiated something with the prosecutors. She was cooperating. The in-house attorney was let go the following day. In the days that followed, the story leaked to the press. First, the Miami Herald. A small note about an ongoing federal investigation at Miami Central Medical Center. Then the Associated Press picked up the thread. Then CNN Health. The hospital's name was everywhere. My name. Protected by the confidentiality of the qui tam process, while the case was unresolved, was nowhere. I kept working in the emergency room. The federal case lasted 11 months. Alcott denied knowledge of the scheme for 4 months. And then, when prosecutors presented the internal emails proving his direct involvement, including messages where he and Voss discussed procedure quotas to be billed per physician, he changed strategy and accepted a deal. Voss cooperated from the beginning and received a reduced sentence. Miami Central Medical Center, under new leadership and under pressure from the board and institutional investors, accepted a settlement with the Department of Justice. Payment of $23,400,000 in restitution to the federal government, plus civil fines. $23,400,000. The qui tam action had been successful, and under the False Claims Act, I was entitled to 22% of the recovered value. I was in the emergency room when Marcus called me with the final numbers. I walked out through the back corridor, went to the staff bathroom, locked the door, sat on the lid of the toilet with the phone to my ear, and listened to Marcus Webb say, in that senior attorney voice that lets no emotion through, $5,148,000. Net after fees and taxes, approximately $3,200,000. The deposit will be processed within 15 business days. I didn't cry. I sat there for a moment, looking at the white tile floor of the staff bathroom of a hospital that had tried to silence me, and I thought about something strange. I thought about Mrs. Dolores Menendez, 81 years old, stable angina, discharged in 6 hours. She had died in February. Natural causes, completely unrelated to what the hospital had done. But I had gone to her wake. I had stood at the back of the room in civilian clothes, without the family knowing who I was. She never knew her name had been used to steal from the government. She never knew a physician had documented it in a paper notebook. She never knew anything, but I knew. And now there was an account settled that she never asked for, but that was, in some measure, hers too. 6 months after the federal settlement, Miami Central Medical Center went through a complete leadership restructuring. The new CMO was a 43-year-old emergency medicine physician from Jackson Memorial Hospital. The new CFO had a background in hospital compliance, not revenue cycle, and the director of the new Department of Clinical Ethics and Billing Integrity, a position created as part of the terms of the federal settlement, was me, not because I had asked, because the board had offered, and because, after thinking about it for 3 days, I had accepted, not for the title, not for the salary, because there were 23 other physicians whose names had appeared on those fraudulent charts. 23 professionals who, like me, had done nothing wrong and whose names had been used without consent. Someone needed to make sure that would never happen again. And I knew that hospital better than any outside hire ever could. In my first week in the new role, I reorganized my office. I placed in the bottom drawer of the desk, locked, out of habit, an old notebook, black cover, yellowed pages, notes in small, careful handwriting, 11 names, dates, codes, values. I wasn't going to throw it away. Some things deserve to be remembered, not as bitterness, not as a trophy, as proof that one person, with a notebook and the decision not to stay silent, can change the outcome of an entire system. 17 years ago, I walked into that hospital with a worn backpack and a coat with a laundry tag. Today, I walk in with the badge that says what I always was, even in the years when they tried to convince me otherwise. Dr. Valeria Cross, Miami Central Medical Center. This hospital is mine. It always was.
Valeria Cross didn't need to shout. She didn't need to confront anyone in a hallway. She didn't need to post anything on social media. She didn't need anyone to believe her. She only needed a notebook, patience, and the decision not to be complicit in silence. Think about that for a second. 17 years of loyalty. 17 years of building, saving, serving. And when they decided she knew too much, when they called her into a room and tried to intimidate her with carefully chosen words, she smiled, said thank you, and went back to work, with the recorder still in her pocket. Valeria's lesson is not about medicine. It's not about hospital fraud. It's about what happens when an ordinary person decides that the truth is worth more than the safety of pretending they didn't see anything. Have you ever been in a place like that, where you knew something was wrong, but staying quiet felt like the only option? If this story moved you, share it, because someone on your list needs to hear this today. And if you want to see what happens when an entire company discovers, too late, the true cost of discarding the man who kept it standing, the next file will leave you speechless. 20 years building every system, every process, every solution inside that company. A new CEO with an MBA thought he could replace him with 3 junior hires. He was wrong about the cost, wrong about the replacement, and completely wrong about what happens when the man who built everything decides to buy the wreckage. The Retribution file. Subscribe. The next case begins soon.